I know lighting can get confusing, so I'm gonna be teaching you guys what lights you need in order to keep your pet chameleon nice and healthy. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So I always say the two most important things when it comes to caring for a chameleon is proper supplementation and proper lighting, specifically UVB. So today we're going to be talking about all the lights that you need for your pet chameleon. Now, the advice that I'm going to be sharing in this video is going to be for a veiled, panther, Jackson's chameleon, male or female. And I do want to preface this by saying there's more than one way to care for a chameleon. So the lighting options that I'm going to be recommending are what I personally use, but also the ones that have the least margin for error. The ones that will set you up for success would be the hardest to mess up. Now, if you're hearing different information of using this light, feel free, I empower you to do your own research. I empower you to pick the lights that make sense for your chameleon, your enclosure, your environment. But I do want to try and make it as simple as possible. So if you're looking for tried and true, heat bulb, UVB, plant lights, I got you. So the lights that you use for your chameleon enclosure very much depend on the size of your enclosure. So the typical enclosure size most people recommend is a 2 foot wide by 4 foot tall enclosure. So I'm going to be making these recommendations under the assumption that you are also using a 2 foot wide and 4 foot tall enclosure. All the lights I'm going to be referring to and talking about are available in my chameleon kit. I have the basic kit and the advanced kit. They have the exact same heat bulb, exact same UVB. The advanced kit does come with that plant LED light. I also have all these linked on my website. If you're like, hey, I already have the enclosure and supplements and stuff, I just need a new UVB bulb or a different heat bulb, I got you. Check out my website, niptonthechameleon.com. Okay, now that we've got that stuff out of the way, let's talk about heat. So chameleons are cold-blooded animals, which means we have to provide an external heat source in order to help them thermoregulate. That means get warm, get cooler. So we provide them with a heat bulb. So what I recommend is a white heat bulb. We do not want to use red bulbs. And while some people can use ceramic heat emitters, which is something that puts off heat but no light, because we're working with really tall enclosures, 4 foot tall enclosures, I really would recommend using something that does put off some sort of light source. Now, what heat bulb you use will very much depend on the temperature in your home. Say you're keeping your chameleon in a room that's 60 degrees versus a chameleon in a room that's 70 degrees. You may need to pick a different heat bulb. Generally speaking though, most keepers have a lot of success using either a 50 or 60 watt heat bulb. And if you're not sure which one you have, it's written on the bulb itself or on the package. So I would start with a smaller wattage and then work your way up if need be. So start with that 50 watt. If it's not giving you the correct temperatures for your species, you can bump up to a 60, 65, 70, etc. But I would not recommend starting off with a 100 watt and going the opposite direction because chameleons will burn themselves. So where we put our heat bulb does make a difference as well. You'll notice in all of my enclosures, my heat bulb sits in the back corner. That's where I have my basking branch. Again, where your branch sits will depend on the wattage of the heat bulb and the temperature within your home, but I would say generally anywhere from like 6 to 9 inches is like a good distance. You do want to keep in mind that if you have a baby chameleon, they're going to be cute and small, and they're going to get bigger and bigger, which means they're going to get closer and closer to that heat bulb. Also keep in mind, in the summertime, typically our homes get warmer as the temperature outside rises. So some people will have a heat bulb that they use during the summertime and a heat bulb they use during the winter time. Also, if the temperatures in your home are getting close to 80 or higher, I'm looking at you all my Florida keepers, because that's usually who DMs me with this question, then you don't need your heat bulb. The heat bulb is only there to provide the correct temperature gradient for your chameleon. With the bulb also comes the fixture. That's going to be the thing that holds the bulb itself. Now with heat bulbs, there's a bunch of different fixtures and a bunch of different sizes. I personally haven't experienced any differences between a smaller or a larger heat bulb fixture. The smaller ones are obviously going to take up less space on top of your enclosure, so that might be preferred so it's not taking up as much room, but I've used big ones just fine. So how do you know when you need to replace your heat bulb? Well, it'll tell you because it'll burn out. So it's always a good idea to have a couple spare heat bulbs on hand just in case that heat bulb burns out, then you can quickly replace it with a new one. And just as a friendly reminder, all lights should be off at night, including your heat bulb. Chameleons really do benefit from a temperature drop at night, so you can make sure that they are all turned off. In fact, get yourself an outlet timer or smart plug so that it automatically turns on and off and you don't have to worry about it. The last thing I wanted to talk about is how you measure your temperature to make sure you are using the right heat bulb. So you can use a thermometer, little gauge. That's what comes in my Chameleon kit. I would just recommend positioning it a few inches above the branch so that it's sitting at the same height as where your Chameleon is, or you can use a temp gun so then you can actually measure the actual temperature on your Chameleon's back once they're basking. Just keep in mind that chameleons can and will burn themselves if it's too hot for them, so this is something that we'll need to monitor closely. And if you're wanting to know what temperatures your species needs, I encourage you to check out my care guide so you can learn more about your individual species. With heat bulbs, we have the wattage, we have the white light, but there's still a bunch of different kinds. You can get a reptile bulb, you can get a not reptile branded bulb. Back when I started keeping chameleons, we were using incandescent heat bulbs. I think those are becoming harder and harder to find. LEDs don't put off a ton of heat, so those aren't necessarily recommended. So the current most popular choice is going to be a halogen heat bulb. The one that comes in my Chameleon kit is the 50-watt halogen. Now keep in mind, a halogen is going to be hotter than, say, an LED. So this is where the wattage and type of heat bulb used will very much depend on which brand, wattage, how you have your enclosure set up, but that would be a good place to start. Okay, UVB. This is the most important light that your chameleon is going to need. UVB is what allows your chameleon to properly synthesize vitamin D3, absorb their calcium, and honestly, keep them healthy. Without proper UVB and proper supplementation, your chameleon is at serious risk for getting things like metabolic bone disease and honestly dying an early death. So this is something we do not want to cut corners on, and we absolutely want to make sure that we have the correct one. Now, just like I said at the beginning, there is more than one way to care for a chameleon, and there's more than one light that you can use. All these recommendations I'm going to be giving for UVB are off of my experience and, again, that 4-foot tall enclosure. So with UVB, there's a bunch of different types. There's compact UVB, which is going to be those squiggly bulbs that come in the not so awesome Chameleon kit and are what available at most chain pet stores. You have T8s. It's letter T and the letter 8, and then you have T5s. So a lot of people think that they have a T in front of their light and they're like, I've got it, but actually they're using a T8. This is what is most common for a linear UVB bulb, again, available in a chain pet store. However, I am seeing more and more carry T5s, which is very exciting, but the T8s are older technology, so they're not gonna penetrate as far into the enclosure as the T5s, which is the recommended option and was the newest technology. So let's work our way back to that compact bulb and understand why it's not recommended. So compact bulbs are the same thing as a T5. They're just wrapped together, condensed together, and because of that, they only penetrate a couple inches into the enclosure. So let's say that bulb penetrates 3 to 4 inches on average, and your chameleon is sitting in the middle of the enclosure. That means they're not getting any UVB, which is a problem, right? Because they need that UVB in order to stay nice and healthy, synthesis, calcium, D3, all that fun sciencey stuff. So that's why we recommend the linear UVB bulbs, because they penetrate further into the enclosure. So what I'm gonna be recommending for a 2-foot by 4-foot tall enclosure is a T5, either 5.0 or 6% UVB bulb. Now, let's break that down. 5.0 is made by ZoomEd. It's the ReptiSun 5.0, comes in a red box, and then the 6% is made by Arcadia. Now, those are similar bulbs, if not identical. I can't confirm that, but I've been told by multiple sources that they're actually produced in the same factory. So both are great options. The T5 ReptiSun 5.0 is currently what comes in my Chameleon kit. I've used Arcadia for years, I've used ReptiSun for years, love them both to pieces. So those are my recommendations. With that, you can put your UVB, the T5 5.0 or 6%, right on top of the enclosure, and that'll provide your chameleon with the proper UVB ranges. Now, other options would be a T8. So again, that's that older technology. A T8 5.0 will only penetrate a couple inches into the enclosure, but a 10.0, that's the strength of the UVB, will penetrate further. So let's take a step back. The T5, T8 is the type of UVB, and then the number associated with it is the strength of UVB. So a T5 5.0 is gonna be less UVB than a T5 10.0, which is gonna be more UVB. So going back to I think we're gonna need some visuals, guys, but I'm trying to help you understand this. So if you're gonna use a T8, go with the 10.0 because it doesn't penetrate as far into the enclosure because of the type of bulb, the T8, but the 10.0 is more UVB, so that would be a safe option. My recommendation is going to be the T5, 5.0 or 6%. And just like how we can have too little UVB, too much UVB can be a problem. So if you do decide to use the T5, 10.0 or 12%, made by Reptisun in Arcadia, then I would recommend raising your enclosure up above UVB up above your enclosure about 6 inches, and that should give you the proper UVB ranges that you're looking for. Now, I know there's plenty of places that say Veiled chameleons need this UVB, panther chameleons need this UVB. My T5 5.0 and 6% recommendations are for all chameleon species that are living in that 4-foot tall enclosure, including veiled chameleons. That's due to research that's been done to show that a UV index of 3.0 is sufficient amount of UVB in order to synthesize the D3 calcium absorption, all that good stuff, as well as form the calcium shell on chameleon eggs. I have seen symptoms of too much UVB. I see closed eyes, lethargic behavior, and overall just sick chameleons with instances where they were using a 10.0 or 12%, then they've bumped down to that 5.0 or 6%, and then their chameleon behavior changed. They were active, eating, healthy, growing, all that good stuff. So I'm going to make conservative recommendations based off of my experience, and I would not want to unintentionally be trying to provide too much UVB, especially if you don't own what's called a solar meter, which is a device that measures the UV index so that you know exactly how much UVB you're exposing your chameleon to. If you own a solar meter, fantastic, then I would have no problem rocking a 10.0 or 12%. In fact, I've used them myself, but I also own a solar meter so I can ensure that chameleons are staying in these safe ranges. So we're looking for about a 3.0 reading about 6 inches into the enclosure. Another bulb that I see often is the Shade Dweller 7%. This is not going to be recommended for a chameleon. The Shade Dweller fixture by nature is shade kind of producing. So even though the 7% number is higher and even close to the 6%, it is not equivalent to the T5 6%. So I would not recommend that bulb for a chameleon. Now that we've got our bulb situation, what do you do in the instance that you don't have a 4-foot tall enclosure right now? You're planning on getting one, love that, but you don't have one yet. So what I would recommend is still getting the T5 6% or 5.0 UVB and then just temporarily raising it above the enclosure, especially if you're using a smaller enclosure. Because if we put that bulb directly on top, that's going to be very concentrated UVB and we will be unintentionally overexposing our chameleon to that UVB. So what you could do is get 2 plastic cups and put them on either end to raise it up above the enclosure, or maybe stack a couple of books and you'll be good to go. Now with UVB, we talked about the bulb type, the strength, but what about the wattage? What about the length? So for a 2-foot wide, 4-foot tall enclosure, I'm gonna be recommending a 2-foot wide fixture. Now the fixtures come in 24 inches. They also come in 36, 48, and smaller, but get the 24-inch fixture so it'll span across the entire width of your enclosure, and then you want a 22-inch bulb to go into the 24-inch fixture. So you'll hear wattage and things, but basically you're looking for that size because the size is going to equate to the wattage along with the strength and type of UVB bulb. So as long as you have a 24-inch fixture, 22-inch bulb, T5, Reptisun 5.0, or Arcadia 6%, you are golden, okay? Again, this does come in my chameleon kit. And your UVB bulb is something that you would also want to turn off at night and have on throughout the daytime. How often you replace your UVB will depend if you have a solar meter or not, because the solar meter measures how much UV index there is. Then you'll know exactly when your UVB bulb starts to wane down, fade, get weaker. Because unlike the heat bulb that turns off once it burns out, UVB bulbs don't do that. They'll turn on even if they're no longer producing UVB. So this is a common mistake with new keepers. They assume the light's on, that it's working. Unfortunately not. So the conservative recommendation to ensure that your chameleon for sure is getting enough UVB is replace your UVB bulb every 12 months. So feel free to put that in your Google Calendar, write the date on the bulb, whatever you need to do to make sure that you're regularly replacing that. If you own the solar meter, then you can measure it directly, and then you can know if you need to replace it later than that. Last but not least, the third bulb I'm going to recommend is a plant LED bulb. Now, this comes in my advanced kit, but not my basic kit, because it is not essential have-to-have item. It's not going to impact the health of your chameleon, but if you are using live plants, I would highly encourage you to use a plant LED bulb. This is going to help brighten up your enclosure because, again, we are working with 4-foot tall enclosures and will help keep your plants alive. As someone who did not use a plant LED for my first, I'd say 2-3 years of keeping chameleons, with just my UVB bulb, I was able to keep my plants alive, most of them, but they were not actively growing. They were just kind of staying put, and that's with like really hardy plant species. If you're wanting stuff that's flowering or colorful or actively growing and filling out your enclosure, then a plant LED is the way to go. There are a bunch of different plant LEDs available out there. Feel free to check out my website, neptunechameleon.com, to see which ones I recommend and use myself. Though I would keep in mind that you'll want one that does span across the width of the enclosure. So again, 24 inches, a linear plant LED I've had amazing success with, but I do know other keepers that will use spotlight plant lights. Yeah, that makes sense for their enclosures. And your plant LED is something that you could have on for 12 hours and off for 12 hours as well. Where you put your plant LED is right next to your UVB bulb. I would have them run parallel, side to side, so that they're providing light for the entirety of your enclosure. And then you would just replace that once it burns out. I honestly have not had any of my plant LEDs burn out yet. Some of these are 5+ years old, so it is a worthwhile investment. I understand they can be pricey, but I promise you, it makes such a difference, not only for your plants, but also just lighting up your whole enclosure. So you guys have it. Those are my tips and tricks and advice on which lights to use when it comes to owning a pet chameleon. Thank you so much for listening. I do have individual videos just on heat bulbs, just on UVB, and tips and tricks for keeping plants alive in a chameleon enclosure, so I would encourage you to check those out. I also have detailed care information on my website, neptunechameleon.com, care guides, you name it, I've got it. And please keep an open mind and recognize that there is in fact more than one way to care for a chameleon, and I would encourage you to do your research and make sure you feel comfortable and confident with the care that you're providing for your chameleon. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Leave any questions or comments down below. Feel free to subscribe so you know when I post a new video. Follow me and all my chameleons on social media at Neptune the Chameleon. Check out my website, neptunechameleon.com. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye! All the lights that I'm going to be talking about are linked. That doesn't make sense. So how do you need... Whoa.